My name is Amelia Hathaway, and I am 29 years old. 2 weeks ago, I sat across from my mother in a crowded Seattle coffee shop while she told me my life was a disappointment. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished presenting a new accessibility interface for a local nonprofit. I felt proud. My mother Beatrice felt embarrassed. She stirred her oat milk latte and said it was a shame I was wasting my potential making pennies, when my sister Olivia had just secured her second round of venture capital funding. Olivia is 32. She runs a tech startup in Bellevue. She drives a Tesla Model X and lives in a waterfront condo. I take the light rail and live in a one-bedroom walk-up. For my entire life, my parents have treated Olivia like a queen and treated me like the hired help. That afternoon in the cafe was no different. Beatrice raised her voice just enough so the people at the tables next to us could hear. She asked why I could not be more like my sister. She asked when I was going to grow up and build something that mattered. I kept my eyes on my coffee cup. I knew the rules. If I argued, the lecture would last all evening, so I stayed quiet. But the woman sitting at the table to our left did not. She wore a tailored charcoal suit and had a sleek leather briefcase resting against her chair. I had noticed her typing on her laptop when we sat down. She closed her screen. She stood up. She did not look at me. She walked over to our table, leaned down right next to my mother's ear, and spoke in a voice so quiet and sharp, it cut through the noise of the entire cafe. She said, "I know the seed. Money was not yours, Beatrice. The audit starts Monday." My mother stopped breathing, her face drained of all color. The arrogant sneer she wore a second ago vanished. Her hands started trembling so hard, her coffee spilled over the rim of her cup. The woman placed a heavy, matte black business card face down on the table between us. Then she turned and walked out the door into the Seattle rain. My mother could not even speak. She just stared at that card like it was a loaded weapon. Before I tell you whose name was on that card and how it helped me dismantle my family's fake empire, I have a question. Have you ever watched your lifelong bully turn into a coward in a split second? Let me know your age and your story in the comments. You are listening to Eva Tells Stories. And if you have ever been the scapegoat in your own family, hit the like button, because you are going to love what happens next. The drive back to my apartment in Capitol Hill was suffocating. My mother usually filled the silence in her car with a running commentary on everything I was doing wrong: my posture, my hair, my neighborhood. That afternoon, she kept both hands locked on the steering wheel. She kept checking her rearview mirror. She looked like a fugitive. I sat in the passenger seat and I watched her fall apart. I had managed to slip the business card into my coat pocket before she could grab it. When we reached my building, she did not offer to come upstairs. She barely put the car in park. She just stared straight ahead at the wet pavement and told me she had to go home to talk to my father. She did not say goodbye. I walked up the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment. I locked the door and pulled the card from my pocket. The text was minimal. Evelyn Reed, forensic accountant, Vanguard Capital. Vanguard Capital was the firm backing my sister's startup. Olivia's company, AuraSync, was supposedly building an artificial intelligence platform for accessibility tech. It was the irony of the century. My sister knew nothing about accessibility. I was the one who studied user experience for disabled communities. Olivia studied marketing and networking. Yet 2 years ago, she seemingly manifested $2.5 million in seed funding out of thin air. My parents threw a lavish dinner to celebrate her self-made success. My father Thomas gave a toast calling Olivia the lion of the family. He said the tech world belonged to people bold enough to take what they deserved. I always wondered where that initial money came from. My parents were comfortable, but they did not have $2 million in liquid cash to hand out. When I asked about it back then, my mother called me jealous. She said angel investors recognized Olivia's brilliance and that I should focus on my own stagnant career instead of questioning my sister's achievements. I believed her. I had been conditioned to believe her. But sitting in my quiet apartment looking at Evelyn Reed's business card, The pieces started shifting. Forensic accountants do not track down small business owners in coffee shops to deliver threats unless there is a severe financial crime involved. And they certainly do not use the phrase "the seed money was not yours." I opened my laptop. I searched Vanguard Capital. They were listed as the lead investor for AuraSync's upcoming Series B funding round, a round that was expected to push Olivia's valuation well into the tens of millions. It was the only thing my parents had talked about for 6 months. They had already bought new outfits for the signing gala. My mother's terror in the cafe finally made sense. This was not a random encounter. Evelyn Reed had recognized her. I spent the next 3 hours searching public records. Our family dynamic had always been built on my parents elevating Olivia and burying me. I was the reliable, quiet daughter who asked for nothing. Olivia was the loud, demanding star who took everything. But emotional favoritism is one thing. The panic I saw on my mother's face belonged to a different category entirely. It was the fear of exposure. I needed to know exactly what they were exposed to. I did not call my mother. I did not text my sister. I knew if I asked them directly, they would gaslight me. They would spin a narrative where I was the crazy, paranoid sister trying to ruin a family celebration. That was their favorite tactic. Instead, I searched for the original incorporation documents for AuraSync. Washington state business filings are public if you know where to look. I scrolled past the marketing jargon and the flashy executive summaries. I went straight to the foundational financial disclosures. I wanted to see the exact origin of the seed money Evelyn Reed had mentioned. The documents loaded on my screen. I read the first page. Then I read it again. My heart started beating so hard I felt it in my throat. I stopped breathing. The original $2.5 million did not come from an anonymous angel investor. It came from a trust fund. A specific trust fund established by my late grandfather 10 years ago. A trust fund that was legally registered under one name, Amelia Hathaway. My grandfather passed away when I was 19. He was a quiet man who worked in logistics and lived a frugal life. He always told me he admired my focus. He used to say Olivia chased the spotlight, but I built the stage. I never knew he had that kind of wealth. I never knew he left it to me. My parents were the executors of his estate. They handled all the paperwork when I was still in college. They told me he left a small life insurance policy to cover his funeral and nothing more. I mourned him and moved on. I took out student loans to finish my design degree. I worked night shifts at a diner near campus to pay my rent. I spent years stressing over grocery budgets and utility bills, all while my parents sat on $2.5 million of my money. And then 2 years ago they quietly transferred it to Olivia to fund a fake tech empire. The betrayal was so deep it felt physical. It was not just the money. It was the years of struggle they watched me endure. It was the condescending remarks about my thrift store clothes and my modest apartment. They mocked my financial status while actively financing my sister's luxury life with my inheritance. I sat in the dark, glowing light of my laptop screen. A normal person might have picked up the phone and screamed. A normal person might have driven to Bellevue and thrown a brick through Olivia's pristine glass office doors. I did neither. I did not shed a single tear. The sadness evaporated, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. My parents thought I was weak because I avoided their manufactured drama. They mistook my silence for stupidity. My phone buzzed on the desk. The screen lit up. It was a text from my mother. The first communication since she dropped me off. The message read, "Amelia, I need to stop by your place tomorrow morning. Your father and I have some routine LLC tax updates for you to sign. It is just administrative cleanup. Be home at 9. Routine tax updates." They knew the audit was coming. They were panicking. They needed my signature to cover their tracks. I looked at the text. I looked at the business card from Evelyn Reed. The pieces were aligning on the board. My mother was coming to my apartment to legally bury me. I typed my reply. "Sounds good, Mom. See you at 9. I set the phone down. I was not going to play the victim anymore. I was going to let them walk right into their own trap. Gemini'd and I stared at the glowing screen of my phone. The text message from my mother sat there, a digital trap disguised as a mundane errand. Routine tax updates. The phrase echoed in my mind. Before the cafe, before the woman in the charcoal suit, I might have believed it. I might have signed whatever they put in front of me just to keep the peace. Keeping the peace was my assigned role in the Hathaway family. If our family was a corporate hierarchy, Olivia was the apex predator. She thrived in Bellevue, a city across the water from Seattle that runs on tech money and engineered prestige. My sister lived on the 20th floor of a glass high-rise overlooking Lake Washington. Her life was curated for public consumption. She drove a pristine white Tesla Model X. She wore designer blazers draped over her shoulders like capes. She spoke exclusively in Silicon Valley buzzwords, throwing around terms like synergy, disruptive innovation, and scalable paradigms. I design digital interfaces for people with visual and motor impairments. My job is to make the internet usable for those the tech world often leaves behind. I spend my days testing contrast ratios, screen reader compatibility, and navigating public transit. My life is grounded in utility. Olivia's life was built on optics. Her company Aura Sync was the crown jewel of her carefully constructed reality. She launched it 2 years ago, claiming it would revolutionize artificial intelligence for accessibility tech. The irony was suffocating. Olivia had never written a line of code. She knew nothing about accessibility standards. She studied public relations. Yet she managed to brand herself as a visionary founder. My parents worshipped this aesthetic. To Thomas and Beatrice, wealth was the only metric of human value, and Olivia was their greatest investment. They treated her Bellevue condo like a holy site. Every family gathering took place there, surrounded by minimalist white furniture that looked incredibly expensive and deeply uncomfortable. I remembered a dinner we had just last month. My father stood at the head of Olivia's marble dining table, raising a glass of expensive Pinot Noir. He looked at my sister with a reverence he had never once directed at me. He told the room that Olivia was a lion, a self-made titan, who took the tech industry by storm through sheer willpower. He praised her for bootstrapping her startup. Bootstrapping is the word entrepreneurs use when they build a company using their own savings. During that same dinner, my mother turned to me. She wiped a speck of imaginary dust from her pristine blouse. She asked if I was still doing that charity computer stuff. She said it was sweet that I wanted to help people, but eventually I needed to join the real world and earn a serious living. She suggested I ask Olivia for an entry-level marketing job. Olivia smiled from across the table, sipping her wine, soaking in the worship. She told me I would need a wardrobe upgrade before she could put me in front of clients. They loved the contrast. They needed me to be the failure so Olivia could be the triumph. They used my modest apartment and my nonprofit salary as stepping stones to elevate her status. I was the baseline they measured their success against. But that was before the business card. I pulled the matte black card from my pocket again. I ran my thumb over the raised lettering. Evelyn Reed, Forensic Accountant, Vanguard Capital. I took a deep breath and opened a new browser window on my laptop. I typed Vanguard Capital Bellevue into the search bar. The results populated instantly. They were not just a random investment firm. They were one of the most aggressive venture capital groups in the Pacific Northwest. They were known for funding unicorns, which are startups valued at over $1 billion. I refined my search. Vanguard Capital Aura Sync. The first link was a press release from a prominent tech blog dated 3 weeks ago. The headline announced that Aura Sync was in the final stages of securing a Series B funding round. The lead investor was Vanguard Capital. The article quoted Olivia, who bragged about scaling her team and acquiring enterprise clients. The round was expected to inject tens of millions of dollars into her company. My eyes scanned the article until they hit a specific paragraph. It detailed Vanguard's rigorous due diligence process. The firm was notorious for deploying specialized financial teams to scrutinize every ledger, every contract, and every bank statement before signing a term sheet. They did not just trust founders. They verified everything. The audit starts Monday. The stranger's whisper echoed in my quiet living room. Evelyn Reed was not a casual observer. She was the financial surgeon Vanguard hired to dissect Olivia's company. Forensic accountants are trained to find the money people try to hide. They track wire transfers, verify seed capital, and look for discrepancies in corporate tax filings. If Evelyn Reed was investigating Aura Sync, she was looking directly at the origin of the company. She was looking at the $2.5 million my sister claimed to have bootstrapped. And she knew the truth. She knew the money did not come from a savvy angel investor or Olivia's personal savings. She knew it came from a trust fund in my name. But why approach my mother? Why not confront Olivia directly? I thought about the timeline. My grandfather died 10 years ago. I was 19. My parents were the executors of his estate. They had the legal authority to manage the accounts while I was a student. They were the ones who filed the paperwork. They were the ones who told me there was nothing left but a small life insurance payout. Olivia was the face of the company, but she could not have accessed that trust fund without my parents authorizing the release. Thomas and Beatrice had to be the ones who signed the transfer. They were the architects of the theft. My mother's reaction in the coffee shop was not just shock. It was the visceral panic of a woman realizing her fingerprints were all over a federal crime. If Vanguard Capital discovered the seed money was stolen, the Series B funding would evaporate instantly. But it would not stop there. Venture capital firms do not just walk away when they uncover fraud during an audit. They report it to the Securities and Exchange Commission. They report it to the authorities. My sister's entire empire was built on stolen ground, and the earthquake had just started. The pieces clicked together with cold, terrifying precision. My parents had financed their golden child's fantasy using my inheritance. Now an elite forensic accountant was digging through the wreckage, and the truth was rising to the surface. I looked back at my phone. The text message from my mother sat there waiting for my compliance. Your father and I have some routine LLC tax updates for you to sign. They needed my signature. If Evelyn Reed was asking questions about the origin of the seed money, my parents needed a paper trail to legitimize the transfer. They needed a document proving I had willfully surrendered my rights to the trust. They needed me to retroactively consent to my own robbery. For my entire life, they had conditioned me to be obedient. They trained me to avoid conflict, to keep my head down, and to accept whatever scraps of affection they threw my way. They were banking on that conditioning now. They expected me to blindly sign a legal document because I had always trusted them. They thought I was the same quiet girl who sat at the end of the dining table and absorbed their insults. They had no idea what was sitting on my desk. I closed my laptop. The blue light faded, plunging the room into shadows. The fear that had gripped me in the car was gone. It was replaced by a strange, steady calm. The kind of calm that comes when you finally understand the rules of the game you have been forced to play. My mother was coming to my apartment at 9 in the morning. She was coming to smile, offer me a cup of coffee, and ask me to sign away my future to save my sister's fraudulent life. I walked into my kitchen and poured a glass of water. I stood by the window, watching the rain slick the dark Seattle streets. I was not going to run. I was not going to yell. I was going to let her walk right through my front door. At exactly 9 in the morning, a sharp knock rattled my front door. I had been awake since 4. I spent the early hours cleaning my small kitchen, wiping down the laminate counters, and brewing a pot of cheap dark roast. I needed my hands to stay busy so they would not shake. I opened the door and found my mother standing in the hallway. Beatrice Hathaway looked out of place in my Capitol Hill walk-up. She wore a tailored beige trench coat and carried a pink pastry box from a high-end bakery downtown. I had not seen her hold a pastry box in a decade. She usually criticized my carbohydrate intake before even saying hello. Today she offered a bright, practiced smile. She stepped inside, bringing the scent of expensive floral perfume into my cramped living room. She set the pink box on my coffee table with a theatrical sigh, claiming the traffic over the bridge was dreadful, but she just had to bring me my favorite almond croissants. I watched her perform. It was a masterclass in manipulation. If I had not seen her face drain of blood at the cafe 2 days prior, I would have believed she genuinely wanted to share a morning coffee with her youngest daughter. But I knew the currency my family traded in. Pastries meant she wanted something. The brighter the smile, the deeper the trap. I played my part. I thanked her. I offered to pour her a mug of coffee. She waved me off, saying she could not stay long. She unclasped her leather tote bag. The metallic click sounded loud in the quiet apartment. She pulled out a thick manila folder and dropped it casually next to the croissants. She said your father and I were up late dealing with the family accountant. It turns out there is some leftover administrative clutter from your grandfather's estate. The accountant needs to close out an old LLC. It is just routine paperwork, but we need your signature to finalize the tax filings. She handed me a sleek silver pen. She tapped her manicured fingernail against the top page, right where a yellow sticky note pointed to a signature line. She kept her voice light and breezy. She said, just sign at the tabs, Amelia, so I can get these to the office before 10. I did not take the pen. I picked up the thick stack of paper instead. The pages were warm. They had been printed recently. I told her I just wanted to glance over it. Beatrice shifted her weight. Her smile tightened around the edges. She said, Sweetie, it is 50 pages of legal jargon. You do not need to read it. Your father already reviewed everything. It is just numbers. I smiled back, keeping my expression perfectly vacant. I said, I know, Mom, but you always told me to be responsible. It will only take a second. I walked over to the kitchen counter. I poured myself a mug of black coffee, holding it in my left hand, while I flipped open the folder with my right. My parents always assumed I was a passive reader. They thought I lacked the aggressive intellect Olivia possessed. They did not understand what a user experience designer actually does. My entire career is built on analyzing information architecture. I do not read sentences. I scan for structural hierarchies. I look for where a system hides its most critical data. Legal documents are designed with the same wireframes as a complex website. The boilerplate language sits at the top to lull the reader into a false sense of security. The aggressive terms are always buried in the middle, nested under misleading subheadings. I bypassed the first 10 pages. They were standard tax declarations meant to look boring. I jumped to section 4. The subheading read, Administrative Resolutions. Underneath that block of text, my eyes locked onto a paragraph indented slightly more than the others. It was a retroactive waiver of beneficiary rights. The legal phrasing was dense, but the translation was clear. By signing this document, I was legally stating that I had relinquished all claims to the $2.5 million trust left by my grandfather. I was signing a statement declaring I had directed my parents to transfer those funds to Olivia. The breath hitched in my chest, but I forced myself to take a slow sip of coffee. I turned another page. My eyes tracked down to section 7, Personal Guarantor Assumption. This clause had nothing to do with my grandfather. This was tied directly to AuraSync. The document outlined a commercial vendor credit line. By signing, I was acknowledging that my Social Security number was used to secure the debt, and I was accepting personal liability for any default. I was holding the murder weapon. My parents were not just trying to cover their tracks regarding the stolen trust money. They were trying to chain me to the sinking ship of Olivia's startup. If Vanguard Capital pulled out, due to the audit, AuraSync would collapse. The creditors would come collecting. Olivia and my parents would be protected by the corporate veil of the LLC, while the banks would seize my wages, my non-profit salary, and any meager savings I possessed. They were going to let me drown so Olivia could swim. I looked up from the counter. Beatrice was standing by the door checking her watch. Her foot tapped a frantic rhythm against my hardwood floor. The fake warmth had evaporated, leaving only tense urgency. She asked if I was done playing lawyer yet. She said Olivia had a major pitch meeting this afternoon and they needed this loose end tied up. Loose end. That is what my financial ruin was to them. I knew I could not confront her. If I screamed or accused her of fraud, she would snatch the documents, deny everything, and they would find another way to forge my consent. I needed to delay the signing, but I also needed to keep the physical proof in my possession. I walked back toward the coffee table holding the open folder in one hand and my full mug of dark roast in the other. I looked at Beatrice and gave her an apologetic shrug. I said, "You are right, Mom. It is too confusing. Where do I sign?" Her shoulders dropped in relief. She stepped forward, reaching for the silver pen on the table. I tripped. It was a calculated stumble. I hooked the toe of my shoe under the edge of the area rug. I let my body pitch forward. I extended my left arm. The mug tipped. 8 ounces of scalding black coffee launched through the air. The dark liquid hit the folder squarely in the center. It soaked through the signature pages in a fraction of a second. The ink bled into illegible black smears. The thick legal paper warped and dissolved under the heat. "Oh my God," I gasped, dropping the empty mug onto the rug. "I am so clumsy. I am so sorry." I grabbed a handful of paper towels from the counter and started dabbing frantically at the ruined documents. I pressed the wet paper, ensuring the coffee saturated every single signature line, rendering them useless. Beatrice did not ask if I was burned. She did not ask if I was okay. She let out a sound I had never heard her make. It was a guttural hiss, a sound an animal makes when it loses its prey. She lunged forward and snatched the soaking folder from my hands. Coffee dripped onto her beige trench coat, staining the expensive fabric, but she did not even notice. She stared at the ruined signature lines. Her mask vanished. The carefully curated Bellevue socialite disappeared. She looked up at me. Her eyes were wide and dark with venom, her jaw locked tight. For a brief second, I saw the sheer, unfiltered hatred she held for me. It was not the casual dismissal I had grown up with. It was the desperate rage of a cornered criminal. "You stupid girl," she whispered. Her voice shook with suppressed fury. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" I took a step back, clutching the paper towels to my chest, playing the role of the frightened, disappointing daughter. "I said I can print new ones, Mom. Just email me the PDF. I can sign them tonight." She glared at me, her chest heaving. "We do not have the PDF," she snapped. "The accountant printed these on official watermarked paper. We have to request a new set." She shoved the ruined folder into her leather tote bag. The wet paper crumpled against the lining. She did not say goodbye. She did not look at the pink pastry box on the table. She turned on her heel and marched out of my apartment, slamming the door so hard the framed prints on my living room wall rattled. I stood alone in the silence of my apartment. The smell of burnt coffee filled the air. I walked over to the door and slid the deadbolt into place. My hands were no longer shaking. The fear was gone. They had shown me their hand. I knew exactly what they were trying to do. I had bought myself a few days. The physical threat was temporarily neutralized, but the financial bomb was still ticking. I could not just wait for them to print new papers. I needed to know the exact depth of the crater they had dug in my name. I walked back to my kitchen counter and opened my laptop. It was time to stop reading their documents and start pulling my own. The smell of burnt coffee lingered in my kitchen long after my mother slammed the door. I wiped the dark puddle off the laminate counter, tossing the soaked paper towels into the trash. My hands were perfectly steady. The adrenaline that usually follows a confrontation was absent, replaced by a cold, mechanical focus. I had bought myself a temporary reprieve, but spilling a drink was a delay tactic, not a solution. My parents would secure fresh documents. They would corner me again. I could not wait for the next ambush. I needed to map the entire battlefield before they returned. I carried my laptop to the small dining table and plugged in the power adapter. A user experience designer understands that every digital interface is a series of locked doors and hidden pathways. Companies design systems to guide you toward what they want you to see and away from what they want to hide. My family operated on the exact same principle. For 29 years, they guided me toward feelings of inadequacy to hide their own actions. I was done following their navigation. I opened my web browser and bypassed the standard search engines. I navigated directly to the Washington Secretary of State online portal and the King County Clerk Records database. I did not need passwords to access public business filings. I only needed to know what questions to ask the search queries. I started with the $2.5 million seed money Evelyn Reed had whispered about. I typed my grandfather's full name into the county probate search. The system churned for a few seconds before returning a digitized file from 10 years ago. It was the final settlement of his estate. I opened the document and scrolled past the boilerplate legal definitions. My grandfather was a man who drove the same reliable sedan for 15 years and wore patched sweaters. He never spoke of wealth. But as I read the distribution of assets, the reality of his hidden life came into sharp focus. He had amassed a quiet fortune through decades of early investments in local aerospace manufacturing, and he did not leave it to his children. The filing clearly outlined a generation-skipping trust. The principal amount was exactly $2,500,000. The designated beneficiary was listed in bold black ink, Amelia Hathaway. There were no stipulations splitting the funds with my sister. There were no clauses granting my parents ownership. The money was meant exclusively for me to be held in trust until I reached an age of financial maturity. My parents were merely appointed as the fiduciaries, meaning they had a legal obligation to protect the assets on my behalf. I opened a second tab and pulled the incorporation history for Orasync. The dates aligned with sickening precision. 2 years ago, just months before I turned 27, my parents executed a series of maneuvers. Acting as the trustees, they authorized the liquidation of the investment accounts. The funds were transferred into a holding company and then quietly funneled into Orasync as the primary seed capital. They did not just borrow my inheritance, they drained it entirely to purchase a tech founder fantasy for their golden child. The theft of the trust was devastating, but it did not explain the sheer visceral panic I had seen in my mother. Stealing the money was a past crime. Evelyn Reed's upcoming audit represented a current active threat. The forensic accountant had to be looking at something much more volatile than an old wire transfer. I closed the state portal and opened a new secure window. I navigated to the 3 major credit reporting bureaus. Every American has a digital financial footprint tracking their debts, their loans, and their liabilities. I had not checked my comprehensive credit report since I applied for my apartment lease 3 years ago. Back then, my record showed a modest student loan balance and a single credit card I paid off every month. I answered the identity verification questions and clicked the button to generate the Tri-Bureau report. The progress bar crept across the screen. I took a sip of cold water. The screen refreshed, displaying my updated financial profile. I stared at the dashboard. My brain refused to process the numbers. The total outstanding debt listed under my name was not a few $1,000s. It was $4 million. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was a glitch in the interface. I scrolled down to the detailed account breakdown. My student loan was still there. My low-limit credit card was still there. But beneath them sat a list of 6 unfamiliar commercial accounts. They were high-yield corporate lines of credit and vendor financing agreements. The origin dates stretched back over the last 18 months. I clicked on the largest account, a revolving credit line for $1.2 million. The primary debtor was listed as Orasync, LLC. The personal guarantor, the individual legally responsible for paying the debt if the company defaulted, was listed as Amelia Hathaway. The mechanics of the fraud laid bare on my screen. Tech startups burn through cash at an astonishing rate. Olivia had used my $2.5 million to lease her Bellevue waterfront office, hire offshore developers, and fund her luxury lifestyle. When that seed money ran out, Orasync began bleeding cash. She needed more capital to keep the illusion alive until Vanguard signed the Series B funding. But banks do not lend millions of dollars to a startup with zero revenue without collateral. They require a clean guarantor. Olivia could not use her own name, because she was already overleveraged. My parents could not use theirs because they had tied up their assets hiding the trust transfer. So they used my social security number. They forged my signature on the guarantee agreements. They weaponized my pristine, quiet credit history to keep their sinking ship afloat. The legal structure was a masterpiece of malice. Aura Sync was established as a limited liability company. That corporate shield meant that if the startup collapsed, Olivia was protected. The creditors could not seize her personal assets, or her Tesla, or her condo. The LLC absorbed the business failure. But the personal guarantor waiver bypassed that shield. By forging my name, my family had explicitly volunteered me as the sacrificial lamb. If Vanguard Capital discovered the fraud on Monday and pulled their investment, AuraSync would instantly default. The corporate lenders would not go after my sister. They would come directly for me. The $4 million debt would trigger immediate personal bankruptcy. My credit would be destroyed. My wages would be garnished for the rest of my life. My modest, peaceful existence would be annihilated. I sat back in my chair. The glow of the laptop illuminated the dark corners of my kitchen. The psychological puzzle of my entire life finally resolved into a clear, horrifying picture. The emotional abuse, the constant comparisons, the relentless narrative that I was a mediocre failure who lacked ambition. It was never just narcissism. It was a calculated operational smokescreen. They needed me to feel small. They needed me to believe I was incapable of understanding complex finances, so I would never look closely at my own records. They kept me at the bottom of the family power dynamic to ensure I remained a compliant, unaware host for their financial parasite. They built a gilded cage for Olivia and buried me under the foundation. The silence in my apartment felt different now. It was no longer the silence of a victim hiding from her bullies. It was the silence of a structure preparing to collapse on its architects. I could not simply call the police. White-collar fraud is notoriously difficult to prosecute without hard internal evidence, and my parents would have prepared a defense claiming I gave them verbal authorization. If I tipped my hand too early, they would destroy the servers, move the remaining money, and leave me holding the $4 million bag. I needed more than just a defensive posture. I needed to pierce Olivia's corporate veil and trap them inside their own LLC. I needed to legally sever the forged lines of credit while simultaneously exposing the theft of the trust. I could not do this with a standard family lawyer. I needed a predator, someone who understood the ruthless mechanics of corporate financial destruction. I picked up my phone and opened a search engine. I began looking for the most aggressive corporate litigation attorneys in downtown Seattle. I needed a shark, and I was ready to bleed the water. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor of the Sterling and Vance law firm felt like ascending into a different atmosphere. Downtown Seattle is built on layers of corporate power, but this altitude belonged exclusively to the predators. The reception area was an expanse of polished concrete and floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the Puget Sound. It was a sterile, intimidating environment designed to make you feel small. For my entire life, my father had spoken about men who occupied offices like these with a hushed religious reverence. Thomas Hathaway worshipped corporate litigators. He viewed them as the modern gods of the tech ecosystem. Meanwhile, he dismissed the legal aid attorneys I worked with at the nonprofit as glorified social workers. I walked past the receptionist and stepped into the corner office of Julian Sterling. I had drained my entire emergency savings account just to secure this initial consultation. Julian did not look like a television lawyer. He was in his late 50s with silver hair and a demeanor so still it felt unnatural. He did not offer a warm greeting. He motioned to the leather chair opposite his sprawling mahogany desk. I sat down and emptied my tote bag. I placed the printed credit reports, the state probate records, outlining my grandfather's trust, and the warped, coffee-stained signature pages my mother had tried to force on me. I did not offer a tearful narrative. I did not ask for pity. I laid out the timeline of the fraud with the same clinical detachment I used to map out user interface wireframes. Julian did not interrupt. He picked up a gold pen and tapped it silently against his legal pad while his eyes tracked across the documents. He studied the credit pulls. He examined the dates of the trust liquidation. He spent a long time looking at the ruined waiver of beneficiary rights, tracing the blurred ink where the hot coffee had dissolved the trap my parents set. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and resonant. He said your family operates with an astonishing level of arrogance. They utilized highly sophisticated financial instruments, but they executed the forgery with the sloppiness of common thieves. They assumed you would never look. He set the papers down and folded his hands. The air in the room grew heavy. Julian leaned forward and delivered the reality check I desperately needed. He told me the arrogance of my parents did not negate the profound legal danger I was currently standing in. The American financial system relies on paper trails, and the paper trail currently pointed a loaded gun directly at my head. Because my legitimate Social Security number was attached to the commercial vendor credit lines, the banks viewed me as the verified guarantor. If I walked into a police station and claimed identity theft, the authorities would look at my familial connection to the company founder and assume I was lying to escape a bad debt. Julian laid out the specific mechanics of the impending disaster. He explained that venture capital firms like Vanguard do not merely glance at spreadsheets. Their forensic accountants audit every single dollar entering and exiting a startup. When Evelyn Reed uncovers the discrepancy regarding the seed money, she will flag it as a critical liability. Vanguard will immediately pull their Series B term sheets. The moment Vanguard walks away, the illusion of Orasync evaporates. The creditors holding the $4 million in corporate debt will panic. They will call the loans due immediately. Olivia will declare corporate bankruptcy, wrapping herself in the protective shield of her limited liability company. And then Julian said, looking me dead in the eye, the creditors will bypass your sister entirely. They will activate the personal guarantee. They will file judgments to seize your bank accounts, your wages, and any future assets you acquire. Worse, if the federal government determines that you acted as a willing straw man to secure fraudulent loans for a tech startup, you will not just face bankruptcy. You will face charges for wire fraud. The weight of the threat pressed down on my chest. I asked him how we stop it. I asked how we sever my name from the debt before the Vanguard audit finishes. Julian picked up his pen again. He said we have to pierce the corporate veil. We have to prove legally and definitively that your sister and your parents conspired to forge your signature without your knowledge. We have to demonstrate deliberate malicious intent. I gestured to the papers on his desk, arguing that the trust records and the credit pulls proved they stole the money. Julian shook his head. He clarified that those documents proved a transaction occurred. They did not prove I was unaware of it. My parents would simply testify under oath that I gave them verbal permission to use my identity to help the family business. She said scenario involving a family, the court side with the signed contract. To win, Julian explained, we need digital fingerprints. We need internal communications. We need emails, Slack messages, or encrypted texts between Olivia and your parents explicitly discussing the forgery, the theft of the trust, and the cover-up. I asked him to subpoena the company records. I assumed that was what high-powered lawyers did. Julian shut that idea down instantly. He told me that filing a civil lawsuit right now would trigger a formal discovery process. The moment Olivia receives a subpoena, she will instruct her offshore developers to wipe the Orasync servers. They will bleach the hard drives, delete the internal messaging channels, and burn the evidence. By the time a judge forces them to hand over the data, there will be nothing left but clean air. If we want the proof, Julian said, we have to steal it before they know we are coming. We need a direct extraction from their private servers before Vanguard finalizes their audit next Friday. The silence returned to the office. The rain lashed against the thick glass windows behind his desk. The reality of his demand settled over me. Julian was not suggesting a legal maneuver. He was suggesting corporate espionage. He told me he could prepare the federal injunctions, the fraud affidavits, and the civil lawsuits. He could build the guillotine, but he could not procure the evidence required to drop the blade. He could not walk into a Bellevue tech office and access their internal network. Someone on the inside has to do it, he said. and it has to be done within the next 7 days. I looked down at the coffee-stained folder. My whole life, my parents had relied on my passivity. They expected me to freeze when challenged. They taught Olivia to be the lion, roaring, taking up space, and demanding obedience. They taught me to be the prey. But prey only survives by learning the habits of the predator. I knew how my sister operated. I knew her ego was her greatest vulnerability. She thrived on performing her superiority. If I went to her looking strong, she would lock the doors. But if I went to her looking weak, broken, and desperate, she would invite me inside just to watch me suffer. I met Julian Sterling's gaze. I did not blink. I told him I would get the internal communications. I told him I would map their servers and extract the text messages, the emails, and the financial ledgers. Julian studied my face, searching for hesitation. He warned me that if I was caught accessing private corporate data without authorization, my sister could press criminal charges against me for corporate sabotage. He asked if I was ready to walk straight into the lion's den knowing the teeth were bare. I reached across the mahogany desk and gathered my documents. I slipped them back into my tote bag. The fear that had defined my 20s was entirely gone. It had burned away, leaving a cold, dark intelligence in its wake. I was stepping off the bottom rung of the family ladder. I looked at the ruthless corporate litigator sitting across from me, and I gave him a tight, genuine smile. I am not afraid of lions, I told him. They are too loud. They never see the fox coming until their throat is already bleeding. I stood up and walked out of the corner office. I had a phone call to make. I needed to construct a financial meltdown. I needed to craft a performance so pathetic my sister would have no choice but to open the gates of her empire and let me walk right in. I left the Sterling and Vance law firm and walked straight to my 10-year-old sedan parked in the damp subterranean garage. The cold concrete walls mirrored the chill settling in my chest. Julian had laid out the terms of my survival. I needed to infiltrate a fortified corporate environment and extract encrypted files in less than 7 days. I turned the ignition and pulled out onto the wet Seattle streets, pointing my car toward the floating bridge that connected the city to the east side. Driving into Bellevue felt like crossing a border into a different country. The skyline was a monument to engineered prestige. Glass towers reflected the gray clouds, hiding the relentless churn of venture capital beneath their polished surfaces. My sister had built her fortress here right in the center of the tech ecosystem. Sync occupied the top 2 floors of a gleaming high-rise overlooking the downtown park. I navigated the visitor parking levels, wedging my battered car between a pristine Range Rover and a matte black Porsche. The contrast was a perfect metaphor for my family dynamic. I walked into the main lobby and rode the silent elevator to the 20th floor. The doors parted, revealing the Sync reception area. It was a flawless execution of startup theater. The floors were poured concrete polished to a mirror shine. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Lake Washington. In the center of the room, employees in designer sneakers lounged on expensive modular sofas, typing on sleek silver laptops. A wall of living moss framed a custom neon sign displaying the company logo. To the left stood a row of indoor bicycles and a station offering nitro cold brew on tap. Every ergonomic chair, every glowing monitor, and every catered snack in this absurd playground had been purchased with my grandfather's frugality. My inheritance had been converted into corporate vanity. I approached the front desk. The receptionist looked up from her screen, her eyes scanning my damp thrift store trench coat with polite disdain. I needed to begin my performance before I even crossed the threshold of my sister's office. I took rapid, shallow breaths, forcing my heart rate to spike. I thought about the $4 million debt anchoring my name to the bottom of the ocean. I let the genuine terror of that financial ruin leak into my expression until my vision blurred with unshed tears. I told the receptionist my name and said it was a family emergency. She made a hushed phone call and gestured toward a corner office at the far end of the engineering floor. The walls were entirely transparent glass. Privacy was non-existent here. Olivia wanted everyone to see her holding court. I walked across the open floor plan, keeping my head down, drawing curious glances from the developers and marketing associates. Olivia sat behind a sprawling desk made of reclaimed wood. She was dictating instructions to a nervous-looking assistant. She wore a tailored ivory blazer that probably cost more than my monthly rent. When she saw me standing in her doorway, her initial annoyance shifted into sharp, calculating curiosity. She dismissed her assistant with a flick of her wrist and motioned for me to enter. I did not wait for her to ask why I was there. I let my shoulders slump, releasing a shaky breath as I collapsed into one of the leather guest chairs. I buried my face in my hands and let out a broken sob. The sound echoed off the glass walls. Olivia stood up and walked around her desk. She did not offer comfort. She crossed her arms and leaned against the edge of the wood, evaluating me like a defective product. I looked up at her, letting the tears spill over my eyelashes. I told her my life was falling apart. I fabricated a story built on the exact insecurities she loved to exploit. I said my landlord was raising my rent beyond what I could afford, and the nonprofit I worked for had just lost its primary funding grant. I claimed I was drowning in credit card debt from unexpected medical bills, and my bank account was overdrawn. I stripped away every ounce of my dignity and handed it to her on a silver platter. I told her I was a failure. I begged my older sister for a job. For 29 years, Olivia had waited for this moment. She always believed she was the superior sibling, but hearing me admit my total defeat in her domain was a narcotic she could not resist. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her face. She walked over to the window and looked out at the Bellevue skyline, savoring the intoxicating rush of undisputed power. She turned back to me and began the lecture. She told me she always knew my little charity career would end in disaster. She spoke about the harsh realities of the corporate meritocracy, claiming that the world only rewards people bold enough to take risks. She reminded me that her company operated at an elite level, dealing with enterprise software and venture capital. She said she could not just hand out favors to unqualified relatives because it would undermine her authority as a founder. I kept my head bowed. I nodded at every insult, agreeing with her assessment of my shortcomings. I played the pathetic, broken younger sister flawlessly. I fed her ego until it swelled to the size of the room. Then the trap snapped shut, exactly as I had modeled it in my mind. Olivia walked back to her desk and opened a slim silver drawer. She pulled out a fresh manila folder. It was identical to the one my mother had brought to my apartment that morning. Olivia placed it on the reclaimed wood desk, smoothing her hand over the cover. She softened her voice, adopting the tone of a benevolent monarch. She said, "Family protects family, Amelia." She told me she could probably create a junior design position for me on the user experience team. The starting salary would be enough to solve my fabricated financial problems and keep a roof over my head. She paused, tapping her manicured fingernail against the cardboard folder. She casually mentioned that our mother had called her about the coffee spill at my apartment. She sighed as if dealing with tedious bureaucracy. She told me the accountants were pushing to get the administrative estate clutter finalized before Vanguard Capital arrived next week. "If I am going to stick my neck out and put you on my payroll," she said, looking me dead in the eye, "I need to know you are a reliable team player. I need this paperwork signed and filed by tomorrow." The leverage was explicit. She was tying my employment and my financial survival to my legal compliance. She thought she was maneuvering me into a corner where I had to sign away my trust fund and accept the forged liability just to keep my head above water. She wanted to keep me inside the building under her direct supervision until the ink was dry. I looked at the folder and feigned a shudder of profound relief. I reached out and touched the edge of the paper. I promised her I would review the clauses tonight and bring it back signed first thing in the morning. I thanked her profusely, calling her my savior. Olivia beamed. The power dynamic was permanently settled in her mind. She pressed a button on her desk phone and instructed human resources to expedite the onboarding process for her sister. 2 hours later, the performance was over and the infiltration was complete. I was sitting at a sleek glass desk in the center of the Aura Sync engineering floor. I wore a temporary employee badge around my neck. I had a company-issued laptop and a set of login credentials granting me access to the internal network. To my left, I had an unhindered view of the frosted glass doors leading to the secure server room. Olivia thought she had broken me. She thought she had secured her human shield protecting her fraudulent empire from the incoming audit. She had no idea she just handed the keys to her kingdom to the person holding the match. I opened my new laptop and connected to the private corporate intranet. The screen glowed, illuminating my face in the dim light of the open office plan. The fox was finally inside the gates. Now I just had to figure out what my sister was hiding behind all this expensive Bellevue glass. My first 72 hours at AuraSync were an exercise in psychological endurance. The engineering floor was a theater of corporate performance where everyone wore noise-canceling headphones and pretended to change the world. They assigned me a desk near the break room right next to the nitro cold brew tab. It was a strategic placement. I was highly visible to everyone walking past, reducing any suspicion that I might be doing anything other than the menial wireframing tasks Olivia handed me. My sister treated me less like an employee and more like a captured flag. She paraded me in front of her senior developers, offering condescending smiles, while explaining that she believed in giving second chances to struggling family members. Then my father showed up. Thomas visited the Bellevue office twice a week to check on the Vanguard Capital negotiations. He acted like he owned the building. He strode onto the floor, wearing his custom-tailored suits, smelling of expensive scotch and cedar cologne. When he saw me sitting at my glass desk, sorting through basic color palettes for the marketing team, he paused. He did not ask how I was adjusting. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, squeezing tight enough to bruise. He leaned down and told me I was lucky Olivia had such a forgiving heart. He advised me to keep my head down, do the grunt work, and maybe I would learn something about real success. I kept my eyes fixed on my keyboard. I nodded and thanked him for the opportunity. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and offered the exact submissive posture he expected. He chuckled, patted my cheek, and walked into Olivia's transparent office to drink sparkling water and admire the empire he built using my stolen inheritance. They thought humiliating me in front of the tech staff was a punishment. They did not understand it was the perfect camouflage. By casting me as the incompetent charity case, they rendered me invisible. No one looks closely at the person tasked with formatting slide decks. Nobody guards their screen when the broken younger sister walks by carrying a tray of expensive lattes. The invisibility gave me the freedom to dissect the company. My official assignment was to audit the user interface of AuraSync's flagship software. The product was marketed as a revolutionary platform designed to provide real-time spatial awareness and object recognition for visually impaired users. According to the pitch deck, it utilized a proprietary neural network to process live camera feeds, instantly translating visual data into spoken audio cues. It sounded brilliant on paper. The problem emerged the moment I started testing the beta version. I ran the application through standard accessibility stress tests. I pointed my laptop camera at various objects around the office. A coffee mug, a stapler, a potted fern. Every time the camera registered an object, the software paused. A small loading wheel spun on the screen. 3 seconds later, a synthesized voice announced the item. 3 seconds. In the world of machine learning, 3 seconds is an eternity. A genuine localized neural network processes image recognition in milliseconds. I opened the developer console to monitor the network traffic. The application was not processing the images locally. It was not routing the data to a sophisticated cloud-based algorithmic structure. It was sending the camera feed through an encrypted endpoint. I traced the numerical address of that endpoint. It did not lead to a server farm in Silicon Valley. It routed to a data processing center in Southeast Asia. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The revolutionary artificial intelligence did not exist. AuraSync was vaporware. There was no algorithm. There was no machine learning model. Whenever a user pointed their camera at an object, the image was transmitted across the globe to a warehouse full of underpaid offshore workers. A human being looked at the picture, typed the word coffee mug into a text box, and hit send. The software then used a basic text-to-speech generator to read the word aloud. My sister was not a tech visionary. She was running a digital sweatshop disguised as an innovation hub. The financial implications were staggering. Paying hundreds of offshore contractors to manually fake automated metrics 24 hours a day required an astronomical amount of liquid cash. That explained the relentless burn rate. That explained where my $2.5 million went. I needed to see the ledgers. The engineering floor used a standard suite of cloud-based collaboration tools. Olivia and the senior staff believed they were secure because they required two-factor authentication. But security protocols are only as strong as the people using them. The lead developer, a man named Marcus, who spent his days trying to impress Olivia, had a habit of leaving his workstation unlocked when he went to the kitchen for his hourly espresso. I waited until Marcus walked away. I stood up carrying a stack of printed wireframes and walked past his desk. I dropped the papers, pretending to lose my grip. As I crouched down to gather them, my fingers flew across his keyboard. I executed a simple script I had written the night before, transferring his administrative session tokens to my machine. It took less than 6 seconds. Back at my desk, I used the stolen tokens to bypass the administrative firewall. I was inside the master financial directory. I opened the offshore payroll ledgers. The numbers matched my grandfather's trust fund to the dollar. The initial capital had been systematically drained to pay the overseas contracting firms. When that money vanished, the ledgers showed the sudden influx of the commercial vendor loans. The loans secured by my forged signature. My identity was currently financing the illusion of the fake software. But financial records alone were not enough for Julian Sterling. He needed proof of malicious intent. He needed the smoking gun showing Olivia and my parents actively conspiring. I shifted my focus from the ledgers to the internal communication network. AuraSync used a private messaging server for staff collaboration. Most of the channels were mundane discussions about lunch orders and software bugs. But armed with administrative access, I found a hidden unlisted channel named Founders Chat. There were only 3 members in the channel: Olivia, Thomas, and Beatrice. I began reading the chat logs. The casual cruelty of their conversations turned my blood to ice. They did not speak in coded language. They were so arrogant, they left the evidence sitting in plain text. I scrolled back to a date 14 months ago. Olivia complained about the offshore payroll costs running high. Beatrice replied saying they needed to leverage another credit line to keep the metrics looking strong for the Vanguard scouts. Olivia typed, "We cannot use my name again. The banks are asking too many questions." Then my father responded, "Use your sister's social security number. She never checks her credit anyway. I will sign the guarantor forms tonight and date them retroactively." Olivia replied with a laughing emoji. "Perfect. Just make sure you copy her signature from that old lease agreement so the bank does not flag it." There it was. The definitive proof of federal wire fraud, identity theft, and corporate conspiracy. The weapon I needed to sever the chains they wrapped around my neck. I prepared to download the chat logs and the financial ledgers. I initiated the secure transfer protocol, masking my digital footprint so the system administrators would not detect the data extraction. A progress bar appeared on my screen. The estimated time to complete the download was 45 minutes. Suddenly, a shadow fell across my keyboard. I looked up. Olivia was standing beside my desk, her arms crossed, holding a sleek tablet. Her eyes were narrowed, studying the reflection on my monitor. She asked what I was working on that required so much intense focus. I quickly toggled the screen to display a complex array of accessible color contrast charts, hiding the download window behind the graphic interface. I forced my heart rate to remain steady. I offered a meek smile and said I was just trying to finalize the new visual hierarchy you requested. I want to make sure the presentation is perfect for the engagement dinner this weekend. Olivia relaxed her posture. The mention of her upcoming engagement dinner, the high society event celebrating her relationship with the Vanguard executive, instantly distracted her. She loved being reminded of her impending social triumph. She nodded approvingly, telling me to finish up and reminding me that the dinner was a formal affair. She warned me not to wear anything that would embarrass the family in front of her future in-laws. I assured her I would blend right into the background. She smirked and walked away, the heels of her designer shoes clicking against the polished concrete. I watched her retreat back into her glass office. I glanced down at the hidden progress bar slowly creeping toward completion. I had the files, but retrieving them from a local machine was too dangerous. I needed to ensure the data was safe and ready to deploy at the exact right moment. The engagement dinner was scheduled for Saturday night. It presented the perfect opportunity to execute the final phase of the extraction, while their guards were lowered by expensive wine and unearned applause. Saturday evening arrived with a cold drizzle that made the downtown Seattle streets slick and reflective. The engagement dinner was held at a private dining room in a restaurant so exclusive it did not have a sign over the door. It was a place where tech billionaires and venture capitalists conducted business over plates of locally sourced seafood that cost more than a car payment. I arrived 10 minutes early, wearing a simple black dress I bought on clearance 3 years ago. I checked my coat and let the hostess guide me to the private enclave at the back of the establishment. The room was enclosed by thick frosted glass, deadening the noise from the main dining floor. A long table draped in heavy white linen dominated the space, set with crystal goblets and polished silver. My family was already there. Olivia wore a designer silk gown that caught the dim ambient light, making her look like royalty holding court. Beside her sat David. He was a senior partner at Vanguard Capital. He was 12 years older than my sister, with silvering hair at his temples and the easy, relaxed posture of a man who was accustomed to having the world rearrange itself to suit his preferences. David was not just a romantic partner. He was the linchpin in Olivia's survival strategy. She was marrying the man responsible for authorizing the Series B funding. It was a calculated merger disguised as a love story. My parents sat across from the happy couple, practically vibrating with pride. Beatrice wore a pearl necklace she had taken out of a safety deposit box for the occasion. Thomas ordered a bottle of champagne that required the sommelier to fetch a special key from the wine cellar. When I walked into the room, the conversation paused just long enough to let me know I was an intrusion. Olivia offered a tight, bright smile and patted the empty chair at the far end of the table, effectively seating me as far away from the Vanguard executive as possible. I sat down and placed my small clutch purse in my lap. My phone was already unlocked inside the bag. The psychological atmosphere in the room was thick enough to choke on. For the next hour, I played the quiet, obedient shadow. I watched my sister perform the role of the visionary entrepreneur, while David looked at her with genuine admiration. He believed her lies. He believed she built Orasync from nothing through sheer determination. He had no idea he was preparing to marry a woman who ran a digital sweatshop funded by stolen inheritance and forged vendor debt. The dinner progressed through courses of Wagyu beef and seared scallops. Beatrice kept the conversation focused strictly on the upcoming wedding and the tech empire. Every time the topic drifted even slightly, she steered it back to Olivia. At one point, David politely turned to me, asking what I did for a living. Before I could even open my mouth, my mother interrupted. She waved her hand in the air and said, "Amelia does charity work for the disabled. It is very sweet, but we are trying to encourage her to learn the corporate ropes under her sister." David offered a polite nod and turned his attention back to his wine. The hierarchy was established. I was the charity case, the dependent relative they graciously tolerated. I reached into my purse. The restaurant provided a secure, high-speed wireless network for their private dining guests. Olivia had connected to it the moment she sat down, complaining about the cellular reception behind the frosted glass. That was the only opening I needed. During my days formatting slide decks at the Orasync office, I had not just located the hidden chat logs. I had discreetly paired my device with my sister's cloud account, using the administrative tokens I lifted from the lead developer. But corporate security protocols required the devices to share a localized network to authorize a bulk data clone, without triggering a security alert to her phone. I had been waiting for this exact scenario, a location where we were both stationary connected to the same local network for an extended period of time. Under the table, my thumb found the edge of my phone screen. I navigated the custom script I had written. I did not need to look at the interface. I had practiced the sequence of taps 20 times in my dark apartment. I initiated the cloning protocol. A faint vibration buzzed against my thigh, indicating the transfer had started. It was pulling the specific encrypted backups of the founder's chat channel directly from the cloud servers. Right as the data began to flow, Thomas tapped his knife against his crystal goblet. The sharp, ringing sound silenced the table. He stood up, adjusting the lapels of his expensive suit. He raised his glass of champagne, holding it high under the ambient chandelier light. He looked at Olivia with an expression of pure, unadulterated worship. He began his speech. He talked about watching his eldest daughter grow into a titan of industry. He praised her relentless work ethic. He told David that he was marrying a woman who knew how to carve her own path in a ruthless world. Under the table, the second faint vibration pulsed against my leg. 20% complete, Thomas continued his toast. He shifted his gaze toward me for a fraction of a second, his eyes flat and devoid of warmth. He told the table that success in their family was not handed out, it was earned. He said, true power comes from having the vision to take what is yours and the loyalty to protect the people who helped you build it. 40% complete. The hypocrisy was staggering. He was standing in a room paid for by my stolen future, boasting about earning success while actively covering up a multi-million-dollar forgery. He was raising a glass to family loyalty while planning to let me go to federal prison so his golden child could secure a venture capital payout. I took a slow sip of my water, keeping my face relaxed in a pleasant, vacant smile. Beatrice dabbed at the corner of her eye with a linen napkin, playing the role of the overwhelmed, proud mother. David reached over and squeezed Olivia's hand, looking deeply moved by the patriarchal display. 60% complete. The data packets were funneling into my device. These were not just spreadsheets or payroll ledgers. They were the raw, unfiltered text messages between my parents and my sister. They contained the exact dates they discussed draining my grandfather's trust. They contained the explicit instructions Thomas gave to forge my signature on the commercial loan documents. They contained the jokes Olivia made about my ignorance while she spent my inheritance on waterfront office leases and luxury cars. 80% complete. Thomas raised his voice for the grand finale. He said to Olivia and David, a partnership built on trust, innovation, and an unbreakable foundation. May your future be as bright as the empire you have created. He raised his glass. The table echoed his words, murmuring their agreements. They all drank the expensive champagne, savoring the taste of a victory they believed was secure. A long, solid vibration hummed against my thigh. 100% complete. The script executed perfectly. The connection severed, leaving no trace of the digital extraction. The raw chat logs, the undeniable proof of their conspiracy, now sat safely encrypted on my local storage drive. The corporate veil was officially pierced. I placed both hands on top of the linen tablecloth, joining the polite applause. I looked at my father as he sat back down, beaming with pride. I looked at my mother, wiping away her fake tears. I looked at my sister, basking in the glow of her stolen kingdom. They thought they were at a celebration. They did not realize they were sitting at a crime scene, and the person they banished to the end of the table was holding the murder weapon. The dinner stretched on for another hour of rich desserts and hollow laughter. I ate every bite of my food. I engaged in small talk when required. I let them enjoy their evening. I let them savor the illusion of their untouchable status. Let them drink the fine wine and dream about the upcoming Series B millions. Let them believe the quiet, compliant daughter had finally accepted her place at the bottom of the hierarchy. When the bill was paid and the coats were retrieved, we walked out into the damp Seattle night. Olivia and David climbed into the back of a waiting black car. My parents headed toward the valet stand, arm in arm. Beatrice turned back to me, giving a brief dismissive wave, telling me to get home safely and not to be late for work on Monday. I watched their taillights fade into the city traffic. The damp air felt crisp and clean against my face. I reached into my purse and let my fingers brush against the cold glass of my phone screen. The trap was no longer a theory, it was fully armed and loaded. I turned and walked toward the train station. I did not need to go back to the Orasync office. My brief career as a submissive design assistant was over. I had a meeting scheduled for the morning, and I needed to prepare. It was time to bring Julian Sterling and Evelyn Reed together. It was time to build the guillotine. Monday morning brought a sharp chill to the Seattle harbor. I walked into the Sterling and Vance law firm right as the clock struck 8. The receptionist did not ask for my name this time. She simply nodded and pressed the button to unlock the glass doors leading to the inner corridors. I bypassed the waiting area and walked straight into the corner office. Julian Sterling was sitting behind his mahogany desk, but he was not alone. Sitting in the leather guest chair, wearing the same tailored charcoal suit I saw in the coffee shop, was Evelyn Reed. I stopped in the doorway. Evelyn turned her head and evaluated me with eyes that looked like chips of flint. Julian gestured for me to take the empty chair next to her. He explained that a corporate litigator and a forensic accountant often share mutual interests when a tech startup is built on sand. Evelyn did not offer a warm handshake. She told me she had been auditing Orasync for 3 weeks. She explained her background. She grew up in a household where money was a weapon used by a controlling father. She became an auditor because she liked the undeniable truth of mathematics. Numbers do not lie, and they do not gaslight you. She told me she had flagged the suspicious origin of the seed capital early in her investigation, but she needed proof of where it went and how the subsequent debt was structured. She whispered to my mother in the cafe because she wanted to trigger a panic. She knew guilty people make careless mistakes when they are frightened. I sat down and pulled the encrypted storage drive from my purse. I placed it on the desk between them. I told Evelyn she was right about the panic. I said they made a mistake and I caught it. Julian plugged the drive into his secure terminal. He mirrored his display to the large monitor mounted on the wall. I directed him to the decrypted chat logs and the offshore payroll ledgers I pulled from the Orasync servers. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the office was the soft click of Julian scrolling through the files. He read the messages between Olivia and my parents. He saw the exact timestamp where my father suggested using my social security number to secure the vendor loans. He saw Olivia laughing about the forgery. He traced the offshore payments, proving the artificial intelligence software was a fabricated shell operated by underpaid human contractors. Julian leaned back in his chair. He let out a slow, measured breath. He said, "This is not just civil liability. This is an orchestrated criminal enterprise." Evelyn looked at the screen, and her expression hardened. She said Vanguard Capital was preparing to hand your sister $30 million based on this illusion. But she warned us that our window to stop it was closing much faster than we anticipated. Evelyn opened her sleek leather briefcase and produced a glossy printed invitation. She slid it across the desk. It was an invitation to a demo day gala hosted by Orasync. The venue was the Space Needle Event Pavilion. The date was this coming Friday. She explained Olivia's strategy. My sister was using her engagement to David as leverage to fast-track the Series B funding. She organized a high-profile public relations event, inviting Seattle tech journalists, local politicians, and the most prominent venture capitalists in the Pacific Northwest. Olivia intended to deliver a keynote speech demonstrating her fake software and then force David to sign the term sheets on stage in front of the cameras. Evelyn looked at me with grim urgency. She said if David signs those papers, Vanguard becomes legally bound to the startup. The subsequent fallout will take years to untangle in the courts. During that time, the creditors holding your $4 million forged debt will seek immediate repayment. They will freeze your assets before Julian can file a single defense brief. The truth will eventually come out, but you will be financially crushed in the interim. We have to stop the signing before the ink hits the paper. Julian tapped his gold pen against his legal pad. He said filing a quiet injunction today would alert their lawyers. They would use the next 4 days to route the remaining stolen trust money into offshore accounts, where we could never recover it. They would liquidate their real estate and declare personal bankruptcy, leaving you with nothing. We need to strike when their guard is down and their assets are fully exposed. We need to execute the legal strike on Friday night. I looked at the glossy invitation sitting on the desk. A slow, cold realization washed over me. The very trap my sister built to secure her fake empire was the exact stage I needed to destroy it. I looked at Julian and Evelyn. I told them Olivia just promoted me. I explained that she thought she was keeping me under her thumb by making me an entry-level design assistant. But her arrogance meant she handed me the administrative tasks no one else wanted to do. I told them I was assigned to format the slide decks for the Friday keynote. I was the person scheduled to run the audiovisual booth at the Space Needle. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. She asked if that meant I had direct control over the presentation screens. I nodded. I told her I would have unrestricted access to the 40-foot LED displays behind the podium. I would control the master audio feed for the entire pavilion. I would be locked inside a soundproof booth looking down at the stage. Julian stopped tapping his pen. A dangerous, predatory smile crossed his face. He understood the geometry of the ambush. He laid out the legal strategy. He would spend the next 4 days drafting the federal lawsuits for breach of fiduciary duty, wire fraud, and identity theft. He would coordinate with a federal judge he knew well, securing ex parte injunctions. Those are specialized court orders that freeze a target's bank accounts and property deeds without giving them prior notice. The freeze would activate at the exact moment the trap was sprung. Evelyn agreed to attend the gala posing as a vanguard observer. She would ensure David and the other investors were present in the front row. She would act as the physical witness to the fraud, rendering Olivia incapable of spinning a false narrative to her fiancé. Julian looked at me. He said I will have the process servers and the authorities waiting in the lobby of the Space Needle. But I cannot walk into a private corporate event and seize the microphone. The catalyst has to come from the inside. You have to be the one to drop the blade. I looked back at the monitor displaying my parents' words. I thought about the decades I spent shrinking myself to make them comfortable. I thought about the coffee spilling on the forged documents and the absolute hatred in my mother's eyes. I was done shrinking. I told Julian to prepare the paperwork. I promised him I would handle the presentation. We spent the next 2 hours mapping every technical detail of the digital hijack. We planned the timing, the visual sequences, and the exact moment I would override the system. There was no room for hesitation. If my sister suspected anything, she would have me removed by security before the keynote even began. I had to maintain the facade of the broken, grateful sister for 4 more days. I left the law firm and walked back into the damp city air. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a calendar alert from the Aura Sync corporate network, reminding me of a mandatory marketing meeting in 30 minutes. The countdown had officially started. The guillotine was built, sharpened, and waiting in the shadows. I just needed to walk back into the Bellevue Tech Tower and smile while I polished the blade. Friday night enveloped Seattle in a thick, damp fog, wrapping around the illuminated spire of the Space Needle. The observation deck and its adjoining event pavilion hovered above the city like a glowing halo. I stood near the back of the glass-walled room, adjusting the audio mixer on my control board. The venue was an architectural marvel designed to make everyone inside feel like they were ruling the metropolis below. Through the panoramic windows, you could see the dark waters of the Puget Sound and the distant working-class shipyards. It was a stark contrast to the pristine, curated wealth gathering inside the room. It was the perfect stage for my sister. The pavilion dripped with unearned arrogance. Venture capitalists in tailored suits mingled with software engineers wearing expensive casual wear. Waiters wearing white gloves carried silver trays offering champagne and tiny portions of seared ahi tuna. The air buzzed with the sound of elite networking. It was that specific frequency of tech industry chatter where every conversation is a pitch, every handshake is an appraisal, and every compliment is a transaction. My extended family occupied a cluster of high-top tables near the front row. Aunts and uncles who had not remembered my birthday in 6 years were out in full force. They wore their finest clothes, sipping top-shelf liquor, basking in the reflected glory of Olivia's fabricated empire. Growing up, my relatives always treated family reunions like corporate shareholder meetings. They measured human worth strictly by academic awards and earning potential. When Olivia brought home an acceptance letter to a prestigious business school, my Aunt Caroline threw a catered barbecue and bought her a designer watch. When I graduated with my design degree, Aunt Caroline handed me a $20 bill and asked if I planned on drawing cartoons for a living. Tonight they looked at Olivia like she was a deity. She glided across the polished hardwood floor in a sleek emerald gown, shaking hands and posing for photographs with local business reporters. Thomas flanked her left side, playing the proud patriarch. He pointed out landmarks through the floor-to-ceiling windows, gesturing expansively as if he personally built the Seattle skyline. He was selling the illusion of generational success, offering a masterclass in performative wealth. I scanned the crowd and found the real targets. David sat in the center of the VIP section, wearing a custom tuxedo, looking every bit the enamored fiancé. He was chatting with 3 other Vanguard partners who had flown in from California specifically to authorize the funding. They had sleek leather portfolios resting on the table in front of them, containing the term sheets. Millions of dollars ready to be transferred based on a lie. A few tables away, standing quietly near a towering floral arrangement, I spotted Evelyn Reed. She wore her signature charcoal suit holding a flute of sparkling water. She did not look at me. She kept her eyes fixed on David and the Vanguard partners. Her presence was the anchor I needed. She was the witness who would ensure the fallout could not be contained or spun by my father's public relations tactics. She was the guarantee that Vanguard would act the moment the truth hit the screens. The lights in the pavilion flickered, signaling the guests to take their seats for the keynote address. The low hum of the crowd began to settle into a hushed, expectant silence. I ran my fingers over the plastic sliders on the AV console, preparing the microphone frequencies for the stage. A sharp scent of floral perfume cut through the sterile, conditioned air of the pavilion. I did not need to turn around to know who was standing behind me. Beatrice approached the tech perimeter. She wore a dark sapphire dress and a diamond tennis bracelet that caught the stage lights. Her face was arranged in a tight, socially acceptable smile for the benefit of anyone watching, but her eyes were cold and frantic. She stepped past the velvet ropes sectioning off the audio-visual equipment and invaded my workspace. She did not offer a greeting. She reached into her designer clutch and pulled out a thick folded stack of papers. They were crisp white and heavily watermarked. The reprinted tax documents. The new trap. Beatrice thrust the papers against my chest, forcing me to take them or let them drop to the floor. I caught the stack with my left hand. She leaned in close, her lips barely moving as she spoke. The fake maternal warmth she attempted in my apartment was gone, replaced by raw, urgent demand. She said the accountant rushed these through today. Olivia is about to take that stage and secure the future of this family. You are going to sign these right now, Amelia. No coffee, no clumsy accidents. You sign them and you do not ruin this night. She reached into her purse again and withdrew a heavy gold pen. She uncoiled the cap and pressed the barrel into my right hand. Her fingernails dug into my palm. She was trying to intimidate me using the same physical posturing she employed when I was a teenager. She expected me to shrink under the weight of her authority. She expected the lavish surroundings, the wealthy crowd, and the ticking clock to pressure me into submission. I looked down at the documents. I felt the familiar weight of the retroactive waiver and the guarantor assumption. The legal chains she wanted to lock around my wrists, to drag me down with their sinking ship. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I met her gaze, holding it with a steady, unblinking focus. I let the silence stretch for 3 long seconds, letting her feel the sudden, unfamiliar shift in our dynamic. I was not the terrified daughter anymore. I was the architect of her impending ruin. I offered her a soft, genuine smile. I took the gold pen and tapped it gently against the top page of the contract. I said, "You are right, Mom. Tonight is too important to leave any loose ends. I need a flat surface to sign these properly. I will take them into the booth. I will sign them right after the speech. I promise." Beatrice studied my face, searching for any trace of deception or defiance. She found nothing but calm compliance. Her shoulders relaxed a fraction of an inch. The frantic edge in her eyes dulled, giving way to a smug, triumphant satisfaction. She believed her intimidation tactic worked. She believed she had finally forced the scapegoat back into the pen. She smoothed the fabric of her sapphire dress. She said, "See that you do. Bring them to my table the moment your sister is done talking." She turned on her heel and walked back toward the VIP section, taking her seat next to Thomas in the front row. She leaned over and whispered something in his ear. My father looked back at me over his shoulder and gave a short, approving nod. They thought they had secured their fortune. They thought the $4 million lie was safe. I watched them face the stage. The event coordinator signaled me through the headset resting around my neck, telling me we were 2 minutes away from the introduction. I gathered the forged contracts and the gold pen. I stepped away from the exposed mixing board and walked toward the primary control booth. It was a small, soundproof room, enclosed in heavy tinted glass, positioned directly above the center aisle. It housed the master server controls for the 40-foot LED screens and the primary audio feeds. It was the nerve center of the entire pavilion. I stepped inside and pulled the heavy acoustic door shut. The ambient noise of the crowd vanished instantly, replaced by the quiet hum of cooling fans and server racks. I reached out and engaged the steel deadbolt. A heavy metallic click echoed in the small space. I placed my mother's documents face down on the desk. I did not need her pen. I pulled my encrypted storage drive from my pocket and inserted it into the master projection terminal. Through the tinted glass, I saw Olivia walking up the stairs to the stage, adjusting the microphone clipped to her collar. The room fell silent, waiting for her to speak. The trap was locked. The applause rolled through the pavilion like a tidal wave. Olivia stepped into the spotlight. Her emerald gown caught the stage illumination, shimmering as she walked to the center of the platform. She paused, letting the ovation wash over her. It was the exact moment she had chased her entire life. She looked out at the sea of venture capitalists, tech journalists, and our beaming parents sitting in the front row. She adjusted the sleek wireless microphone clipped to her collar. The room quieted. She began her keynote. Her voice was smooth, practiced, and dripping with corporate charisma. She painted a picture of a scrappy startup born from a desire to change the world. She threw around words like disruption, synergy, and scalable paradigms. She paced the stage with the calculated energy of a seasoned tech founder. She talked about the grueling early days, the late nights, and the mythical bootstrapping phase. She claimed she built Aura Sync dollar by dollar, sacrificing her own comfort to fund her vision of an accessible future. Sitting in the soundproof AV booth, I watched her perform. The tinted glass rendered me invisible to the crowd below, but I had a perfect vantage point of the entire room. I rested my hands on the cool metal of the mixing console. Beside my hand sat the forged documents Beatrice had shoved at me minutes earlier. They felt like artifacts from a different era. Olivia shifted the tone of her speech. The ambitious entrepreneur gave way to the humble, grateful daughter. She looked directly at Thomas and Beatrice in the front row. She told the audience that none of her success would be possible without the bedrock of her family. She praised our parents for instilling her with honest values. She said they taught her that true wealth is earned through integrity and hard work. Thomas puffed out his chest, nodding solemnly. Beatrice placed a hand over her heart, soaking in the admiration of the billionaires sitting nearby. David, the Vanguard executive, looked at his fiancée with raw devotion. I listened to the lies echoing through the pavilion monitors. This was not a new dynamic. When we were in high school, Olivia entered a regional science fair and took first place. She accepted the trophy and the applause with the exact same humble smile she wore right now. What the judges did not know was that I had spent 3 weeks building the motorized circuitry for that project. When I tried to tell my parents, Thomas pulled me aside. He told me Olivia had the presentation skills required to sell the idea, and my role was to support her. They taught my sister at a very young age that taking credit for my labor was not theft, it was delegation. Tonight, the delegation was coming to a permanent end. On stage, Olivia raised her hand, gesturing toward the towering 40-foot LED display wrapping around the back wall. She told the crowd it was time to move past the theory and demonstrate the product. She announced she was going to unveil the real-time capabilities of the AuraSync neural network. She smiled, looked over her shoulder at the display, and said the cue phrase we had rehearsed all week. "Let me show you the future." I did not cue the software demo. I reached forward and flipped the manual override switch on the primary projection server. The 40-foot LED wall went pitch black. The sudden absence of light plunged the stage into shadows. A collective murmur rippled through the audience. Tech glitches happen at live events, and the crowd assumed this was just a minor server lag. Olivia maintained her composure. She tapped the side of her headset and offered a self-deprecating joke about the perils of live software demonstrations. She looked up at the AV booth, expecting me to fix the issue. She could not see my face through the tinted glass, but I was looking right back at her. I engaged the encrypted drive I had plugged into the console. I routed the video feed away from the presentation laptop and directly into my local storage folder. I hit the execution command. The 40-foot screens ignited. The sudden burst of bright white light made several people in the front row blink and shield their eyes. There was no sleek startup logo. There was no spinning artificial intelligence graphic. The screens displayed a high-resolution scan of a legal document. The text was magnified to a gargantuan scale. Everyone in the room could clearly read the header: "The Last Will and Testament and Generation Skipping Trust of Arthur Hathaway." The camera panned slowly down the document, highlighting the designated beneficiary in bright yellow. Amelia Hathaway. The principal amount sat frozen on the screen. $2,500,000. The murmur in the room shifted. Confusion replaced the polite anticipation. Olivia stopped smiling. She squinted at the screen behind her. She tapped her microphone again, her voice rising an octave. She commanded the AV team to cut the feed, claiming there was a network error pulling the wrong file. I pressed the next key. The trust document vanished, replaced immediately by the corporate banking ledgers I had extracted from the offshore payroll folders. The dates on the ledger perfectly aligned with the liquidation of my grandfather's trust. The screen showed the $2.5 million transferring directly into the AuraSync holding accounts. It showed the money immediately draining out, wired in hundreds of microtransactions to data processing centers in Southeast Asia. I watched Evelyn read from the booth. The forensic accountant stepped away from the floral arrangement and moved closer to the Vanguard partners. She leaned down and pointed at the ledger on the screen, confirming the exact discrepancy she had been hunting. Panic set in on the stage. Olivia waved her arms at the tech crew standing near the side curtains. Thomas stood up from his front row seat, his face flushing a deep crimson. He shouted for someone to pull the plug. I moved to the third exhibit. I hit the spacebar. The screen shifted to a tri-bureau credit report. It was my credit report. The red alerts blazed across the 40-foot display. 6 high-yield commercial vendor loans. The total debt hovered in bold black numbers. $4 million. The primary debtor was AuraSync LLC. The personal guarantor was Amelia Hathaway. The venture capitalists in the room were seasoned financial predators. They knew exactly what they were looking at. The term sheets sitting in their leather portfolios were suddenly worthless. The room erupted into a cacophony of frantic whispers and scraping chairs. David stood up, his face pale, staring at the financial ruin projected behind the woman he was about to marry. Beatrice spun around in her chair, looking up at the tinted glass of the AV booth. Her mouth opened in a silent scream. She realized the compliant daughter holding her gold pen had just detonated a bomb in the center of their lives. I saved the killing blow for last. I triggered the final slide. The credit reports dissolved. In their place appeared crisp, undeniable screenshots of the founder's chat server logs. The text messages between my sister and my parents were blown up to the size of billboards. Thomas Hathaway read the screen. Use your sister's social security number. She never checks her credit anyway. I will sign the guarantor forms tonight and date them retroactively. Olivia Hathaway replied right beneath it. Perfect. Just make sure you copy her signature from that old lease agreement so the bank does not flag it. The ballroom fell into a stunned, breathless silence. The undeniable proof of federal wire fraud and identity theft hung over the crowd, inescapable and permanent. There was no spinning this. There was no public relations maneuver that could erase 40-foot-tall text messages admitting to a felony. Olivia stared at the screen, her jaw trembling. The lion was cornered. She turned back to the audience, gripping the microphone, her knuckles turning white. She opened her mouth to speak, desperate to weave a new lie, desperate to explain away the evidence. I reached out to the audio mixing board. I grabbed the master slider controlling the stage microphone. I pulled it all the way down. Olivia kept speaking, but no sound came out. She tapped the mic, her panic escalating into visible terror. I reached for the secondary slider, the one connected to the broadcast microphone, sitting on the desk inside my soundproof booth. I pushed the volume to the maximum level. I leaned forward, my lips inches from the steel mesh of the microphone. For 29 years, my voice had been the quietest sound in my family. I never yelled. I never argued. I only ever apologized. My voice filled the cavernous pavilion, echoing off the glass walls and reverberating through the floorboards. It was calm, steady, and entirely devoid of fear. Before Vanguard signs anything, I said, let us talk about the $4 million in stolen identity debt funding this vaporware. I sat back in my chair, removed my hands from the console, and watched the house of cards collapse. My voice hung in the air long after the sound system clipped off. The words bounced off the panoramic windows and settled over the high society crowd like a weighted blanket. On the stage, the polished tech founder vanished. Olivia took a staggering step backward. Her designer heels caught the edge of the microphone stand, sending it crashing to the hardwood floor. The sharp feedback squeal made half the room flinch, but nobody looked away from the 40-foot display behind her. The blue light from the projected chat logs bathed her emerald gown, casting long, harsh shadows across her face, making her look hollow and terrified. She looked down at the VIP section, searching for a lifeline. She locked eyes with David. Just 10 minutes ago, the Vanguard executive had looked at her with pure adoration. Now he was staring at a stranger. David did not say a single word. He looked at the screen, reading the text message where my father plotted the forgery. He looked at the credit report proving the startup was functionally bankrupt. Then he reached down and picked up his leather portfolio. He snapped the brass clasp shut. It was a small sound, but in that quiet room it echoed like a gavel striking wood. David turned his back on the stage and walked toward the exit without a backward glance. The other Vanguard partners followed him, leaving the term sheets unsigned and the $30 million deal dead on the table. The departure of the investors broke the spell. The room erupted into chaos. The polite tech networking devolved into frantic shouting. Journalists scrambled to pull out their phones and take photos of the giant screens. The extended family sitting at the high-top tables sat frozen. Aunt Caroline gripped her crystal wineglass so tightly her knuckles turned white. The wealthy relatives who had spent their entire lives mocking my modest career were now staring at undeniable proof that their favorite niece was a felon. Thomas Hathaway could not accept defeat. He had spent his decades bullying people into submission, and he reverted to his primary instinct: anger. His face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. He leaped out of his front row seat, knocking his chair backward. He pointed a trembling finger toward the AV booth, shouting for security to cut the power to the pavilion. He demanded someone arrest me for corporate sabotage. He bellowed that the text messages were fabricated and the credit reports were a jealous smear campaign. He began marching toward the stage stairs, intending to manually tear the cables out of the projection servers. He did not make it past the first step. A man stepped out from the shadows of the center aisle, blocking my father's path. It was Julian Sterling. The corporate litigator wore a sharp navy suit and carried a thick leather satchel. He did not look intimidated by the screaming patriarch. He looked bored. Flanking Julian were three individuals wearing plainclothes windbreakers with federal badges clipped to their belts. They were not local security guards. They were federal process servers and financial regulators. Evelyn Reed stood right behind them, holding her own stack of manila envelopes. Julian raised his hand, silencing my father. He did not shout. He spoke with the resonant, carrying voice of a man who spent a career dominating courtrooms. He informed Thomas Hathaway that security would not be cutting the power because the venue was now an active crime scene. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a heavy stack of legal documents wrapped in thick rubber bands. He pressed the stack directly into my father's chest, forcing Thomas to take it or let it fall. Julian announced the contents so the entire VIP section could hear. He said, "You have just been served with a federal civil lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty regarding the trust of Arthur Hathaway. You are also served with an ex parte asset freeze. As of 3 minutes ago, your bank accounts, your property deeds, and your investment portfolios are legally locked." Thomas looked down at the paperwork. The bluster drained out of him, leaving an old, frightened man. His hands began to shake so badly the papers rattled against his suit jacket. Julian turned his attention to the stage. Olivia was still standing there, trembling under the glare of the projection lights. Two of the federal agents walked up the stairs and flanked her. Julian stepped up to the podium and handed her a separate stack of documents. He informed her that she was being served for corporate fraud, identity theft, and securing commercial loans under false pretenses. He told her the SEC was formally seizing the AuraSync servers, and the Bellevue office was currently being locked down by authorities. Beatrice finally moved. She stood up from her seat, her sapphire dress trembling. She tried to invoke the family hierarchy one last time. She pleaded with Julian, claiming this was all a terrible misunderstanding. She said her daughters were just having a disagreement, and it did not need to involve the authorities. She tried to weave the narrative back into a simple domestic dispute, hoping to sweep the wreckage under the rug. The facade of family loyalty broke the moment the threat of prison entered the room. Olivia looked at the federal agent standing next to her. She looked at the ruined venture capital deal walking out the door. She realized the corporate veil was gone, and she was going to bear the brunt of the criminal charges. The golden child did exactly what a spoiled, entitled predator does when cornered. She turned on her enablers. Olivia pointed a shaking finger directly at Beatrice and Thomas. Her voice cracked as she screamed that it was their idea. She yelled to the entire room that she knew nothing about the forged signatures or the stolen identity. She claimed her parents told her the trust money was legally hers to use, and they handled all the banking documents behind her back. She threw the mother and father who had worshipped her, who had stolen for her, straight under the bus to save her own skin. Thomas stared at his eldest daughter in profound shock. The lion he had praised all his life was currently tearing his throat out. Beatrice let out a sob, covering her mouth with her hands. The pristine, unshakable alliance of the Hathaway family disintegrated right there on the hardwood floor. They began screaming at each other, trading vicious accusations and pointing fingers, while the tech journalists recorded every second of the meltdown. From my vantage point inside the soundproof booth, I watched the destruction. I did not feel a rush of manic joy. I did not feel the need to gloat. I felt a quiet, profound peace. The psychological weight I had carried since childhood evaporated. The invisible chains my parents used to bind me to the floor were broken. I was free. I watched the authorities begin interviewing the panicked investors. I watched my aunt and uncle quietly gather their coats and slip out the side door, pretending they had never supported the fraud. I watched my parents realize they were going to lose their home, their status, and their freedom. The event coordinator hammered his fist against the tinted glass of the booth, demanding I open the door. I took my time. I safely ejected my encrypted drive and slipped it into my pocket. I looked out over the pavilion one last time, taking a mental photograph of the empire lying in ruins. Then I reached forward and slid the deadbolt open, ready to walk out into the aftermath. I woke up in my own bed on Saturday morning. The silence in my apartment felt profound. For the first time in my life, I did not feel the phantom weight of my family expectations pressing down on my chest. I made a pot of dark roast coffee. I sat at my small laminate kitchen counter and opened my laptop. I did not need to search hard to find the wreckage. The digital shockwave had already hit the shores of the Seattle tech industry. The premier tech journalism site ran the story at 6 in the morning. The headline sat at the top of their homepage in stark black text. Startup founders implicated in identity theft and wire fraud. The article detailed the events of the Space Needle Pavilion with devastating accuracy. A reporter had managed to get a photograph of the 40-foot LED screen displaying my parents' text messages. The image was undeniable. The journalists outlined the mechanics of the vaporware, revealing that the revolutionary accessibility software was nothing more than a mechanical shell game operated by offshore laborers. Within hours, Vanguard Capital released a terse public relations statement. They formally announced their immediate withdrawal from the Series B funding negotiations. They stated their firm was cooperating fully with federal regulators regarding the discrepancies uncovered during their due diligence process. Evelyn Reed had done her job flawlessly. David was a ghost. He canceled the upcoming wedding and severed all personal and professional ties with my sister. His legal team issued a cease and desist order demanding Olivia stop contacting him. She lost her shield, her funding, and her future husband in the span of 12 hours. In the corporate world, confidence is currency. When Vanguard walked away, the confidence surrounding Aura Sync evaporated. This triggered the next phase of Julian Sterling's legal snare. The commercial lenders holding the forged vendor credit lines panicked. Standard corporate loan agreements contain strict clauses regarding investor backing and executive fraud. When the news broke, the banks enacted an automatic call on the $4 million debt, demanding immediate repayment. Under normal circumstances, the banks would have deployed ruthless collection agencies to seize my assets because my Social Security number was forged on the guarantor paperwork. But Julian had filed the identity theft affidavits and the federal fraud injunctions on Friday afternoon, while my family was busy getting dressed for their high society dinner. When the creditors tried to execute the personal guarantee, they slammed headfirst into a federal court order. The legal wall held. The liability deflected off my clean record and crashed directly back onto the Aura Sync Limited Liability Company and its managing directors. My sister and my parents were trapped under the full weight of the financial collapse. Growing up, my mother controlled the flow of information in our household. If an extended relative asked why I did not attend a prestigious university, Beatrice would smoothly intercept the question. She would sigh and say I lacked the drive for higher education, omitting the fact that they refused to co-sign my student loans while simultaneously paying cash for my sister's out-of-state tuition. They were masters of the domestic spin room. They believed they could talk their way out of any consequence by rewriting history. But you cannot gaslight the Securities and Exchange Commission. You cannot rewrite a bank ledger. The tech ecosystem relies on raw data, and the data proved they were thieves. The social destruction mirrored the financial ruin. Our extended family operated like a flock of birds always flying in the direction of the strongest current. For years that current was generated by Olivia. But the moment the fraud became public knowledge, the flock scattered. Aunt Caroline, the woman who hosted lavish barbecues for my sister's achievements, deactivated her social media accounts to avoid being associated with the scandal. My cousins who used to mock my thrift store clothes suddenly developed collective amnesia regarding their relationship with the Hathaway tech empire. My parents had spent their entire adult lives cultivating a pristine image among the Seattle elite. They attended charity galas, joined exclusive country clubs, and curated a social circle built entirely on optics. In the span of a single weekend, they became pariahs. The very people they sought to impress were the ones sharing the news articles and whispering about their disgrace. It is a unique kind of poetic justice, watching status-obsessed individuals lose the only currency they value. At noon, my cell phone began to vibrate on the kitchen counter. The screen illuminated displaying my father's name. I let it ring. 2 minutes later, my mother called, then my sister. The notifications cascaded down my screen in a relentless digital barrage. Over the next 48 hours, they left 80 separate voicemails. I sat in the quiet glow of my apartment and listened to every single audio file. I treated it like a user experience case study, observing the predictable stages of narcissistic collapse. The first wave of messages was pure venom. Thomas shouted into the receiver, promising to sue me for defamation. He ordered me to call Julian Sterling and retract the federal lawsuits, claiming he would ruin my life if I did not comply. Olivia left a recording dripping with hatred, accusing me of being a jealous sociopath who deliberately sabotaged her happiness because I could never achieve my own. By Sunday afternoon, the tone shifted. The anger morphed into frantic negotiation. The reality of the ex parte asset freeze had set in. They realized they could not access their bank accounts to hire defense attorneys. Beatrice left a message attempting to sound calm and rational. She proposed a family meeting to sort out this unfortunate misunderstanding. She promised they would find a way to repay the trust money if I just dropped the criminal charges. She tried to invoke the concept of familial duty, reminding me that blood is thicker than water. By Monday morning, the negotiations dissolved into naked despair. The federal agents had formally seized the Bellevue office computers. The final voicemails were pathetic. My sister sobbed into the phone, begging me not to let her go to prison. She pleaded for mercy, claiming she was just trying to make our parents proud. My mother left a recording where she sounded old and broken, pleading with me to save them from ruin. I did not answer a single call. I did not reply to a single text message. Every time a voicemail finished playing, I tapped the screen and forwarded the encrypted audio file directly to Julian Sterling. The threats became evidence of witness intimidation. The apologies became recorded confessions of guilt. I handed their own words over to the corporate litigator, adding bricks to the prison walls they were building for themselves. I watched the empire they built on my back burn to the ground. I did not hold the match. I simply stopped shielding them from the wind. Now the smoke was clearing, leaving nothing but the charred remains of their ambition. The authorities were moving in, and the legal machinery was grinding into motion. It was time to watch them face the ashes. The high-rises of Seattle have a way of looking different when you are no longer gazing up at them from the bottom of someone else's shadow. 6 months have passed since the night the Space Needle became a courtroom. The Pacific Northwest autumn has settled in, bringing a persistent cleansing drizzle that washes the city clean. For the rest of the world, the Orasync scandal was a week of sensational headlines and a cautionary tale about venture capital greed. For me, it was the period where the dust finally settled on the ruins of my childhood. The legal machinery of the United States is often slow, but when it moves against blatant fraud, it is a crushing weight. Olivia did not have the stomach for a protracted federal trial. Once Julian Sterling and Evelyn Reed presented the full scope of the digital evidence, the text messages, the offshore payroll ledgers, and the forensic trail of my grandfather's trust, her high-priced defense team pivoted to damage control. To avoid a decade in a federal facility, my sister stood before a judge and entered a guilty plea for wire fraud and conspiracy. The sentence was a surgical removal of her identity. She received a massive fine that wiped out her remaining personal accounts, and a lifetime ban from ever serving as an officer or director of a corporate entity. The woman who defined herself by her title was now legally prohibited from ever holding one again. Orasync did not just close its doors, it was liquidated by a court-appointed receiver. The sleek glass office in Bellevue, the nitro cold brew taps, and the custom neon signs were sold at auction to pay back a fraction of the millions she had burned. The office is now occupied by a dental insurance firm. The lion's den has been replaced by cubicles and fluorescent lights. Thomas and Beatrice managed to avoid prison time, mostly because Olivia's testimony placed the primary operational burden on her own shoulders in a desperate attempt to look like a misguided visionary rather than a co-conspirator. But the civil justice system was far less forgiving. Julian Sterling was relentless in his pursuit of restitution. The court ordered my parents to repay every cent of the $2.5 million trust they had drained, along with accrued interest and legal fees. To satisfy that judgment, the life they spent 30 years building was dismantled in a matter of weeks. The house I grew up in, the one where they hosted the exclusive dinners and hid their secrets behind manicured hedges, was sold to the highest bidder. Their luxury vehicles were seized. Their country club memberships were revoked. They were bankrupted in the most public way possible, their names becoming synonymous with the kind of social disgrace that the Seattle elite never forgets. They didn't just lose their money, they lost their audience. In a city built on the concept of the next big thing, my parents became a relic of a very small, very ugly crime. They were forced to move into a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a gritty section of Tacoma, far away from the glass towers and the prestige of the East Side. They went from being the architects of a dynasty to two people living on Social Security and the meager wages from a part-time retail job. Thomas managed to land at a hardware store. I stayed away from them during the entire process. I changed my number. I moved into a new apartment with a view of the water, a place they will never find. I didn't need to see their suffering to feel whole. I just needed the silence. But Seattle is a small town disguised as a big city. Last Tuesday, I found myself in a grocery store on the edge of the city limits picking up ingredients for a dinner with friends. I was reaching for a carton of eggs when I saw her. Beatrice was standing near the checkout line. She looked 10 years older than the woman who had shoved the gold pen into my hand at the gala. The tailored trench coats were gone, replaced by a generic pilled fleece jacket. Her hair, once perfectly maintained by a Bellevue stylist, was thin and graying at the roots. She was meticulously counting out change to pay for a small bag of groceries, her hands trembling just as they had in the cafe. When she finished paying, she turned, and our eyes locked. For a split second, I saw the old Beatrice flicker to life. Her posture straightened. She clutched her plastic bag to her chest, and her face twisted into a familiar expression of manufactured grief. She didn't scream. She didn't apologize. She did what she has always done. She tried to play the victim. She took a step toward me, her voice a fragile theatrical whisper that carried just enough to be heard by the people around us. She said, "Amelia, look at us. Look at what you've done to your father and me. We're living in a shoebox. Your sister is a broken woman. Is this the justice you wanted? To see your own mother struggling to buy bread?" She paused, waiting for the reaction. She was waiting for me to argue to defend myself or to offer a sliver of the guilt she had spent 29 years installing in my brain. She wanted a scene. She wanted to feel powerful one last time by making me feel responsible for her choices. I looked at her. I didn't feel the old familiar spike of anxiety. I didn't feel the urge to explain that she was the one who forged the documents, she was the one who stole the money, and she was the one who chose the lie. I didn't feel the heat of anger in my cheeks. I felt nothing. I looked at the woman who had watched me drown for years, and realized she was just a stranger in a grocery store. The power she held over me wasn't a mountain. It was a ghost I had finally stopped believing in. I didn't say a word. I didn't offer a single syllable of closure. I simply offered a brief, empty nod, the kind you give to someone who accidentally bumps into your cart in a crowded aisle. Then I turned my back on her and walked toward the exit. I could hear her calling my name behind me, her voice rising, becoming more shrill as she realized the silent treatment was the only weapon she couldn't defeat. She was shouting about family and forgiveness, and how I would regret this when I was older. I didn't turn back. I pushed my cart out into the crisp autumn air. The interaction lasted less than 60 seconds, but it was the final period at the end of a very long, very dark chapter. Proving they have lost all power over you isn't about the big speeches on a stage. It's about the moment you realize their voice no longer rings in your head. I loaded my groceries into my car, a reliable, modest vehicle I bought with my own honest salary. I sat in the driver's seat and took a deep breath. The debt was gone. The trust was restored. My name belonged to me again. But as I pulled out of the parking lot, my phone buzzed in the center console. It was a notification from Julian Sterling's office. The subject line was urgent. It wasn't about the bankruptcy or the civil suits. It was a new filing from the state's attorney office regarding a separate discovery found in the OraSync server backups, something Olivia had hidden even from our parents. My hands tightened on the wheel. The fallout was far from over, and the next layer of the truth was about to change everything I thought I knew about why they chose me as the sacrifice. The rain in Seattle has a specific rhythm when you are finally standing on your own ground. It is no longer a cold weight pressing you into the pavement, but a soft, percussive background to a life you built with your own hands. 6 months ago, I was a woman drowning in $4 million of fraudulent debt and 29 years of psychological conditioning. Today, I am sitting in an office that actually exists. The walls are not made of glass designed to put me on display, and the coffee in the break room is not a bribe or a weapon. With my credit fully restored and my grandfather's $2.5 million trust returned with interest and damages, I had enough capital to live in luxury for the rest of my life. I could have bought the waterfront condo in Bellevue just to spite Olivia. I could have leased a car that cost more than a house. But I realized very quickly that seeking public validation through the same status symbols my family worshipped would just be another form of imprisonment. I did not want their life. I wanted the life they tried to take from me. I decided to open my own boutique tech incubator, right here in the heart of Seattle. I named it the Heritage Lab. It is a legitimate ethical UI/UX design space, specifically focused on funding and mentoring marginalized creators. We help people who have been overlooked by the traditional venture capital gates developers from underrepresented communities, designers with disabilities, and people who have spent their lives being told their ideas are too small or too niche to matter. I do not look for the next unicorn. I look for the next honest solution. My days are now filled with the kind of work that actually matters. I spend my mornings reviewing accessibility prototypes and my afternoons mentoring designers who used to feel invisible just like I did. I have built a chosen family of friends and colleagues who respect my boundaries and value my input. We do not have founders' chat channels where we plot to ruin each other. We have a culture built on transparency and mutual support. For the first time in my life, the people around me know exactly who I am, and they do not want to change a single thing about it. Looking back at the wreckage of the OraSync Gala, I realized the ultimate twist of the entire ordeal. The most satisfying payoff was not the moment the LED screens flashed with the truth or the sound of the handcuffs clicking. It was the moment I realized my sister and my parents never actually saw me. They saw a resource. They saw a safety net. They saw a scapegoat they could load their sins onto and lead out into the wilderness. Because they never bothered to learn who I was, they never understood what I was capable of. They were so blinded by their own arrogance that they invited their own destruction through the front door and gave it a desk and a login password. I think about that final encounter with my mother at the grocery store. I think about her pleading for me to see her as a victim. It is a common tactic for people like Beatrice and Thomas. When they can no longer control you, they try to control how other people see you. When that fails, they try to control your emotions through guilt. They want you to believe that walking away is an act of cruelty. They want you to believe that setting a boundary is a betrayal. But the truth is far simpler. You do not owe your life to people who only value you as a tool. You do not owe your future to people who are willing to steal it to decorate their own present. If your family only loves the version of you they can control, they are not family. They are wardens. And the hardest part of leaving that prison is not climbing the walls. It is realizing that the door was never actually locked. You just had to be willing to walk away in silence without waiting for an apology that is never going to come. Silence is not a sign of weakness. It is the most expensive thing you can own because it is the one thing they can never take back from you. The restitution money from the lawsuits helped me build this lab, but the real jackpot was the peace. It was the ability to wake up on a Tuesday morning and not check my credit report. It was the ability to look in the mirror and not see a disappointing daughter. I am Amelia Hathaway. I am a designer. I am a business owner. I am a granddaughter who finally honored her grandfather's legacy by using it to build something real. My name is clean. My debt is zero. And my life is finally my own. I want to thank you for staying with me until the very end of this journey. Stories like mine happen in the shadows of every city every day. They happen in the quiet corners of family dinners and the fine print of legal documents. If you have ever felt like the scapegoat, if you have ever been told that your worth is measured by someone else's success, I want you to know that you are allowed to leave that table. You are allowed to be the fox. I have a question for you, and I want you to answer it honestly in the comments. What is the one boundary you have been afraid to set because you were worried about making trouble? And what would your life look like if you finally set it today? Drop your story and your location below. I read every single comment because I know how much it matters to finally be heard. If this story resonated with you, or if it gave you the courage to look at your own situation differently, please hit the like button and subscribe to Eva Tells Stories. I share these narratives every week because the truth deserves a stage, and you deserve to know that you are not alone. There is another story linked in the description about a woman who discovered her inheritance was hidden in plain sight, and I think you need to hear it. The rain is still falling outside my office window, but the city looks brighter than it ever has. I'm going to head back to my desk now. There is a young designer waiting for me with a brilliant idea for a new interface, and for the first time in my life, I have the power to tell her yes. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next story. Summary of major changes. The narrative was streamlined to focus on Amelia's active agency and strategic infiltration of Aura Sync. The repetitive waiting periods and redundant legal discussions from the original outline were removed to maintain a cinematic pace. The climax was restructured as a high-stakes digital hijack at the Space Needle, providing a visual and dramatic payoff that emphasized Amelia's technical skills. The financial logic was corrected to align with real-world corporate fraud, and the ending focused on Amelia's transition from a victim to an ethical leader in the Seattle tech community. All forced adverbs and repetitive descriptors were eliminated in favor of a show don't tell approach that highlighted the emotional coldness of the antagonists.
The rain has finally stopped in Seattle, leaving the city lights shimmering against the dark pavement. As I sit here in my new office looking out at the skyline that once felt like a cage, I can't help but think about the parents I see every day in the cafes below. I see the way they look at their children sometimes, with a pride that feels like a heavy weight, and sometimes with a quiet, overlooked hope. After everything that happened with my parents and Olivia, I realized that the greatest inheritance isn't money, a trust fund, or a high society name. It is the character we build in the quiet moments when no one is watching. The story of the Hathaway family isn't just a tale of corporate fraud and stolen trust funds. It is a mirror reflecting the hidden fractures in many modern American homes. Living in a hyper-competitive hub like Seattle, the pressure to succeed can be suffocating. We are surrounded by tech giants and self-made millionaires, and it's easy for parents to get caught in the trap of measuring their children's worth by their LinkedIn profiles or the cars they drive. But through the wreckage of my own family, I've learned 5 vital lessons that I believe every parent needs to hear. First, we must redefine what fairness means in a family. For years, my parents believed they were being fair by supporting Olivia, the sister they thought had the most potential. But fairness isn't about dividing resources equally, and it certainly isn't about picking a winner. It is about respecting each child's unique value. Amelia, my true self, was successful in creating tools for the disabled, a quiet but profound contribution to humanity. Olivia was successful at generating numbers and noise. By lowering me to elevate her, my parents didn't just hurt me, they created a moral void in Olivia. They taught her that her sister's life was just a resource to be consumed. When you turn your home into a boardroom where only the high performers get love, you aren't raising a family. You are raising competitors who will eventually turn on one another. This leads to the second, perhaps most dangerous lesson, the seductive trap of the facade of success. In our culture, we are obsessed with optics. We want the Tesla in the driveway and the Series B funding announcement. But when parents orient their children toward the shiny exterior while ignoring the internal compass, they are building a house on sand. Olivia lied because she felt that being the golden child was her only identity. She felt she had to maintain the illusion at any cost because my parents' love was conditional on that success. We must teach our children that integrity is the only currency that never devalues. A small, honest career is infinitely more sustainable and more honorable than a fraudulent empire. If we don't teach them how to be good people, their greatness will eventually be their downfall. Third, we have to talk about the reality of financial independence. My parents thought they were helping Olivia by bootstrapping her company with my stolen inheritance. In reality, they were crippling her. They denied her the most important lesson a young person can learn: the value of falling down and getting back up. By shielding her from failure with stolen money, they ensured that when she finally did fall, the crash would be fatal. True support from a parent should be a launch pad, not a tool for manipulation or a way to hide a child's weaknesses. We owe it to our children to let them experience the weight of their own choices. Fourth, and this is the one that stayed with me the longest, the role of a parent is to be a guide, not a warden. In traditional family structures, there is a deep respect for parental authority, but that authority must be used to empower, not to control. My parents didn't love me. They loved the version of me they could control, the quiet, compliant scapegoat. The moment I set a boundary, the moment I stopped being useful, their love vanished. If you only love your child when they are doing exactly what you want, you are holding them hostage. True parenting requires the courage to let go, to let your child find a passion that might not make sense to you, and to love them even when their life doesn't fit into your curated social narrative. Finally, we must build empathy instead of competition. My parents turned our home into an arena. They used my modest life as a footstool to make Olivia look taller. This kind of toxic comparison creates predators and victims. It makes siblings look at each other with suspicion rather than support. A home should be the one place in a brutal, competitive world where you don't have to prove your worth. It should be the place where we learn to be proud of someone else's victory without feeling like it makes us a loser. As I look at my life now, I realize the real jackpot wasn't the money I got back. It was the person I became while fighting to get it. I learned that I am not a supporting character in someone else's success story. I am the architect of my own. If you are listening to this and you felt the weight of a family that didn't see you, or if you're a parent trying to find the right path in this chaotic, status-obsessed world, I want you to know that you aren't alone. These stories are hard to tell, but they are the ones that heal us. If this narrative resonated with you, if it made you look at your own dinner table a little differently, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Eva Tells Stories. I share these reflections every week because I believe that by looking into these mirrors, we can all find a way to be a little more honest, a little more fair, and a lot more kind. Don't teach your children to be lions so they can roar over everyone else. Teach them to be people of value so that no matter where they go or what they lose, they will always have the respect of the person they see in the mirror. I often wonder as I drive past the old neighborhood if my parents ever sit in their small apartment in Tacoma and think about the numbers Olivia once had. Or if in the middle of the night they finally hear the silence of the daughter they lost. I wonder if they realize that the daughter who failed was the only one who truly knew how to build a life that didn't need a lie to hold it up. Sometimes the most important lesson a child can teach a parent is that love shouldn't have a price tag. But then again, some people spend their whole lives looking at the price and never realizing the cost. I wonder, which one are you?